In the last 18 months, homeowners in these suburbs have already watched between $200,000 and $600,000 disappear from their property's value, and most of them had no idea it was coming. One of the 9 suburbs on this list is almost certainly within driving distance of where you live right now. I'm going to name all 9 suburbs in this video, starting right now. No filler, no fluff, just the numbers. Turk dropped 14.4%, that is $597,600, wiped from the median value in 18 months. Turk is the undisputed king of Melbourne real estate, a postcode built on generational wealth, luxury estates, and an aura of complete financial invincibility. People assume prestige markets are completely immune to the economic gravity that drags down the rest of the country. They are completely wrong. The specific cause crushing Turk right now is extreme interest rate sensitivity on high-debt postcodes. When you are borrowing $3 or $4 million to secure a prestige address, the doubling of the cash rate completely obliterates your serviceability buffers. The ultra-wealthy are not immune to holding costs, and business owners who leveraged their primary residence to fund commercial ventures are now being forced to liquidate. The buyers who used to line up for these estates simply cannot secure the financing approvals required to meet peak 2021 prices. Properties that would have sold in a week are languishing on the market for months, forcing vendors into painful, distressed price reductions that are bleeding equity from the entire suburb. Nearly $600,000 has simply been erased from the median valuation, hollowing out the equity of families who thought their postcode was a financial fortress. The Domain. September 2025 double-digit decline report laid this bare for everyone to see, proving that the top end of town is actively bleeding. And if you think Turk is bad, the next suburb on this list lost nearly double that. And it is a regional city that validates the national scale of the problem. Kyabram dropped 33%. That is $145,000 wiped from the median unit value in a matter of months. During the pandemic, regional towns like Kyabram were aggressively marketed as the ultimate lifestyle escape for exhausted urban workers. City buyers flooded the market, bidding up local real estate with deep pockets and a highly romanticized vision of remote working. But the brutal reality of regional economics has violently reasserted itself, and the primary driver for this massive destruction of wealth is the unwinding of that pandemic premium, coupled with a severe investor exodus. As corporate employers mandated a return to the office, the tree change buyers began quietly selling up and migrating back to the city limits. The critical problem is that the local wage economy in Kyabram simply cannot support the heavily inflated property prices that the city money originally left behind. Once the external metropolitan demand vanished, the secondary market was completely hollowed out. Investors who chased high rental yields during the boom are now trapped with rapidly depreciating assets and a shrinking tenant pool, watching their equity slowly bleed out with every passing quarter. The Real Estate Sorrento January 2026 report confirmed the sheer velocity of this collapse, leaving recent regional buyers completely underwater on their mortgages. The equity destruction here is profound and deeply localized, tearing through the savings of everyday people who bought at the absolute top of a temporary anomaly. And if you think Kyabram is just an isolated regional tragedy, the next suburb is going to shock you, because it is in a city most Australians consider bulletproof, right in the middle of a supposed boom. South Perth dropped 20.4%. That is $185,000 erased from the high-density unit median. If you read the mainstream financial press, you have been told repeatedly that Western Australia is the hottest property market on the continent. You have been told that Perth is completely insulated from the East Coast downturn and immune to price corrections. But South Perth completely shatters that narrative. The core reason this historically beautiful riverside peninsula is bleeding cash is a massive, localized oversupply of off-the-plan units. Over the last 3 years, ambitious developers flooded the South Perth skyline with luxury high-rise towers, promising premium yields and endless capital growth to interstate buyers. But they built far more inventory than the genuine owner-occupier market could ever realistically absorb. Now, those concrete towers are settling, and investors who bought off the plan are frantically attempting to offload their apartments into a secondary market that is already choked with identical listings. The resale values are entirely underwater. Buyers who put down huge deposits are discovering their current bank valuations are coming in hundreds of thousands of dollars below their original contract price, forcing distressed fire sales just to avoid absolute default. It is a catastrophic wealth trap hidden in plain sight, proving that even in a booming state economy, the wrong property type will absolutely destroy your invested capital. And while South Perth investors are drowning in oversupply, the next 2 suburbs are bleeding for entirely different reasons, and the numbers are truly terrifying. Millers Point dropped 55%. That is $666,000 wiped from the median apartment value. Millers Point sits directly in the shadow of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Historically significant, visually spectacular, and considered by most Australians to be among the safest real estate on Earth. The January 2026 real estate ComRed.au report confirmed a financial bloodbath here of unprecedented proportions. The specific catalyst is a toxic combination of exploding heritage strata costs and a rapid investor exodus. Maintaining historically listed apartments requires specialized trades and bespoke materials. As inflation drove those costs into the stratosphere, quarterly strata levies became utterly toxic to investors who simultaneously realized their rental yields could no longer cover basic outgoings. As investors rushed for the exits, the market flooded with inventory that owner-occupiers refused to touch. The price floor collapsed entirely, erasing more than $500,000 of equity in a single 12-month window. And if you think losing more than half your value in the shadow of the harbour bridge is catastrophic, wait until you see what is happening on the outer fringes of the very same city. Oakville dropped 21%, that is $398,000 erased from the median house price. Located in the rapidly expanding northwest corridor of Sydney, Oakville was sold to young families as the ultimate premium acreage dream. Buyers paid astronomical pandemic-era prices for the promise of space, fresh air, and forthcoming community amenities. The dream has turned into a financial nightmare driven by 2 simultaneous blows, devastating flood rezoning and a catastrophic infrastructure pullback. Updated flood mapping has severely restricted land use, instantly devaluing existing properties. At the same time, state and local governments quietly delayed the roads, schools, and shopping precincts promised in glossy developer brochures. Homeowners are now stranded on isolated lots with enormous mortgages, watching the secondary market evaporate. Domain's September 2025 report highlighted Oakville as a premier example of outer ring wealth destruction. Buyers who purchased at the peak are fiercely underwater, unable to refinance and unable to sell without crystallizing a life-altering loss. Oakville is the blueprint for how outer ring estates collapse. But to understand why this pattern is spreading nationally, you need to see the macro numbers pulling the strings. Now that you have seen 5 real examples of already confirmed wealth destruction, you need to understand exactly why this is happening simultaneously across such different markets. CoreLogic's April 2026 monthly data confirmed that national property growth has hit its lowest point in over a year, independently verified by Reuters in the same month. The research is officially forecasting Sydney to fall 0.7%, and Melbourne to drop 1.7% across the entirety of 2026. The pattern is the same in every case. New construction completions flooding specific corridors, mortgage stress from 2021 and 2022 peak purchases forcing distressed sales, and buyer depth that has completely evaporated. When distressed supply meets exhausted demand, equity gets wiped. And the next four suburbs are where this pattern is hitting hardest right now. West Melbourne dropped 19.1%. That is $195,000 wiped from the median property value. Sitting on the immediate edge of Melbourne's central business district, this suburb was marketed to investors as a bulletproof rental cash machine for over a decade. The reality has been catastrophic. An extreme oversupply of generic investor stock is meeting a total collapse in international buyer demand. Block after block of identical apartments are settling into a market where borrowing costs are at their absolute peak. Owner-occupiers have zero interest in small, poorly configured units built exclusively for transient renters. Investors trying to sell are forced to slash asking prices just to generate a single inspection. The Domain, September 2025 report confirmed this wealth destruction in detail. West Melbourne is a disaster for anyone holding a generic apartment, but the next suburb proves that even the most exclusive holiday postcodes are now bleeding cash. Sorrento dropped 22%. That is $485,000 erased from the median house value. The crown jewel of Victoria's Mornington Peninsula, Sorrento has been the playground of corporate elites for decades. Not anymore. The specific cause is aggressive holiday home land taxes combined with a punishing investor exodus. State governments desperate for revenue severely hiked land tax assessments and introduced short-stay levies on properties sitting empty for most of the year. The holding economics for a luxury weekender became completely toxic. Realizing their seaside assets were now financial liabilities, absentee owners rushed to list simultaneously. Inventory flooded the localized market. Borrowing capacity for second homes has been slashed by the banks, so there were no buyers catching the falling knife. Prices collapsed, erasing incredible sums in months. Sorrento proves that even immense personal wealth cannot protect you from the wrong fiscal policy environment. Do you see what every suburb on this list has in common? It is not bad luck. It is three specific conditions hitting simultaneously: extreme oversupply of investor stock, severe interest rate sensitivity, and a complete loss of genuine owner-occupier depth. Every suburb that has already lost 20% had all three of these toxic elements colliding at the exact same moment. When developers build too much of the wrong product, when the cash rate holds at punishing levels longer than anyone anticipated, and when real families are priced out of a community, the artificial floor under property values shatters instantly. The suburbs that bleed hardest are the ones that relied entirely on cheap credit and investor demand rather than local wages and genuine community infrastructure. And right now, the final two suburbs on this list are showing all three warning signs simultaneously. Docklands dropped 24%. That is $260,000 wiped from the high-density unit median. Docklands was sold as Melbourne's future, a gleaming waterfront precinct designed to attract professionals and transform the city's western edge. Instead, it has become the most cited example of investor stock oversupply in Australian property history. The towers are real. The community never arrived. Owner-occupiers refused to embed themselves in a suburb designed for transient rental investment rather than permanent family life. With no genuine residential depth, the secondary market is functionally broken. Desperate investors undercut each other constantly just to escape compounding holding costs. Docklands units are already well documented as among the most underwater properties in Melbourne, and the April 2026 CoreLogic data confirms the bleeding has not stopped. But it is the final suburb that represents the most urgent warning for everyday Australian families who bought at the absolute peak. Box Hill dropped 23.5%. That is $290,000 erased from the median value. This is Box Hill in Sydney's northwest growth corridor, the poster child of the pandemic-era property frenzy. Thousands of young families rushed into this master-planned community, stretching their borrowing capacity to the absolute maximum limit. The cause of the current collapse is a convergence of severe infrastructure pullback and acute interest rate sensitivity on deeply indebted postcodes. When the Reserve Bank hiked aggressively, monthly repayments skyrocketed and disposable income vanished. At the exact same time, the state government quietly delayed the roads, transport links and community facilities used to justify the premium purchase prices. Trapped in a suburb, lacking basic amenities and suffocating under mortgage stress, distressed listings are piling up. The secondary market is bleeding because new buyers refuse to pay 2021 prices for a delayed promise. $290,000 of family equity has simply vanished. If you are watching this and feeling a knot in your stomach, you're asking yourself three urgent questions right now. The first is my suburb next? You do not need to wait for a media report. Look for three specific warning signs in your own postcode today. Check rising days on market. If properties that used to sell in 3 weeks are now sitting with a sign for 90 days, your market is already contracting. Check falling auction clearance rates. If weekends are consistently ending with properties passed in on vendor bids, the buyer depth has already evaporated. And check the investor-to-owner-occupier ratio. Suburbs dominated by investor stock are the first to bleed, because investors will ruthlessly exit a depreciating asset while an owner-occupier will fight to keep their family home. The second question is, should I sell now? You need a nuanced answer because panic is as dangerous as denial. Not all property losses are permanent. You must distinguish between structural decline and cyclical correction. If you own property in a structural decline zone, a single industry town, or a corridor drowning in generic unit oversupply with no genuine community demand, the math strongly suggests cutting losses before the destruction compounds further. But if you hold property in a high-prestige, land-constrained market that has temporarily overcorrected due to interest rate shocks, history is clear. Blue-chip areas with genuine scarcity recover when the credit cycle turns. Do not sell a fundamentally excellent asset simply because the broader market is experiencing turbulence. The third question is, where should smart money be buying instead? While the suburbs on today's list are correcting, specific pockets of Australia are demonstrating genuine resilience and real upside. Middle ring Brisbane suburbs like Chermside are being underpinned by a permanent infrastructure flaw. The billion-dollar Olympic corridor investment is not speculative. It is already contracted and construction is already underway, creating demand that does not depend on cheap credit. Established, heritage-protected inner suburbs of Adelaide, like Norwood and Unley, are insulated by genuine housing scarcity and strong local economic fundamentals that have kept them almost entirely outside the East Coast debt unwinding. And select coastal lifestyle markets in regional South Australia and the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, where land supply is genuinely constrained and the buyer pool is dominated by high-equity owner-occupiers rather than leveraged investors, continue to hold their values despite the broader correction. These markets survive because they are built on real wages and real scarcity, not on the assumption that debt will keep expanding forever. The homeowners who got hurt by every crash in Australian history were not unlucky. They were uninformed. The ones who came out ahead were not geniuses. They were simply watching the numbers before everyone else did. You are now watching the numbers. Tell me below, which suburb surprised you the most on this list? And if your suburb is not here, drop the postcode, and I will tell you what the data says about it.